We welcome you all to Talk the Talk. My name is Janine Stiene.
And I'm Toni-Ann Antoniato,
the Masters of Myofunctional Therapy.
Together we interview physicians, dentists, and other professionals to learn how their expertise can benefit you, your child, or your patient's speech and language skills and complement the services they are receiving. We welcome you to this episode of Talk the Talk, and joining us today will be Marcus Schreier. He is a health and performance coach, and he is going to shed some light on the importance of proper tongue resting posture with a fascinating perspective related to whole body health, wellness, and strength. Thank you, Marcus, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for having me.
Yeah. So tell us and our listeners a little bit just about you and your journey right now.
Yeah. So as you said, I'm a health and performance coach. I called myself that a few years ago. I'm always changing my titles. Like I was like a health coach, health and performance coach, strength coach. And then when I got more into the brain, I called myself a neuro coach. So now you can basically call me whatever. I call myself like a neuro and strength coach now. Sometimes I call myself a human performance specialist. Like it is what it is. Like
Whoever you want to be.
Exactly. Some days I wake up and I want to be that. And some days, but no, like I'm just really someone that's super like fascinated about, anything related to performance, anything related to health. I was always an athlete. So like for me, it was just always, like something that I was actually in the beginning more interested in, like, okay, how can I optimize my own body and like my own health and my own brain? And then, yeah, I just basically like started studying in Germany. So I'm originally from Germany and live in Florida now. And yeah, I'm just a nerd. I'm a big nerd. What can I say? Like, I just study all like multiple hours a day. My main topic in the last few years has actually been the brain. That's also why we're going to talk a lot about the tongue today, because obviously the tongue has a large representation in the sensory cortex, and it's just something that I also happen to do a lot of research in. So I'm definitely excited for that specific topic that actually nobody has had me on so far on a podcast, which is cool.
We're glad to hear that.
Yeah.
It's all new information. How did you, aside from your own health and wellness, how did you start thinking this is the realm you wanted to go in, and what typically do your clients look like and what are they looking for?
Yeah, good question. So right now I'm actually working primarily, I would say primarily with athletes. But I also, since I'm very like, specialized on the brain, I also work a ton with like pain clients or also like athletes in pain. Also more like, more chronic conditions or more complicated conditions like, MS, Parkinson's, like anything along that line. Like sometimes it's funny for me. Like I go to bed at night and I look back on my day and like I worked with a professional athlete, and then I also worked with 80-year-old, Parkinson's.
Wow,
so like it's pretty cool. Like I like to have the big spectrum. And yeah, like I said, I just really thought about when I chose my job of like, okay, what can I do that actually, like, what would I do without, like, if I had all the money in the world, like, what would I do without with my day? And for me, it was always just learning and, just teaching other people about health and performance. And that's sort of like how my path got started. And it was just basically like, it really started out of my passion. And aside from coaching, I also have my own institute where I teach professionals, more about neurotraining, about the brain, about, how to access more of that, quote unquote, hidden performance, hidden potential that we all have. So yeah, that's kind of like how my work looks. I work primarily online nowadays. I have a few clients that I see face to face, but I work primarily online. I do the teaching online. I do the coaching online. So pretty much everything since COVID transitioned more over to online, which is nice.
Isn't that funny? Everything is since COVID. It's like dot 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 since COVID.
Everything has changed. Yeah. Yeah. But for the better. I'm like,
yes.
I'm actually really happy. I in the beginning it was a big transition of like, oh my God, like how am I gonna make, like, how am I gonna see my clients? How am I gonna make money?
How am I gonna
How am I gonna
survive?
live?
Yes.
But then like, yeah, no, it really, got me uncomfortable. So I was thinking, okay, what can I do? And that's how I also like started more of like in the educational space.
Do you have a degree in something in biology? Do you have, so tell
I
us
have
a
a
little
background in like more like sports science.
Okay.
But honestly speaking, that's like maybe like 0.5% of the knowledge that I have gained over the last years. Like I don't know, I've done so many different courses in so many different fields, from like neurology, like biomechanics, psychology, nutrition, gut health, like so many different courses that like it's really hard for me to like sometimes recall where I have some information from. That's why it's good that we actually talk about that article. We're actually like put the study into that blog article. So
Right.
it's always good. Like I have my like notes app on my phone where I just basically like when I read something cool or like it's packed. So like I have like everything in my notes app. So whenever there's something that somebody asks me about something that I know, I usually just look at my notes app.
That's great.
So yeah.
That's great.
So you wrote that article in May 2019, which is what made us come across you and who you are. You wrote a blog post that was crazy strength gains through correct resting position, correct tongue resting position. And you talked about how you can increase your own performance from that strength and athletic side by having your tongue in the right, correct position. So obviously that spoke to us because we do so much as myofunctional therapists with keeping your tongue up in the right position, and never really until recently started to hear about it from the perspective of it increasing your strength and your endurance and all of that. So tell us a little bit about that article that blog post that you published.
Yeah. Honestly, I don't even know what I wrote in that article, but I probably have to like review it. But I actually like before the interview, I was actually like pulling up the study again, and I was actually like looking if there's more research on that topic. Unfortunately, there's not really that much research on that topic because obviously there's probably not that much money involved at like looking at like, okay, do you get stronger if you put your tongue up or down? Like, there's not really like anything that we can sell or do. But yeah, I really think that study was really fascinating. And it was at the same time for me, like understanding the brain. It was not something that I was like super like, blown away by, because I already knew about, some of the connections between the tongue and the brain. And a lot of the things that I do with my athletes, like it's really hard to find like amazing evidence on some of the things that I do. Like you see me do some weird stuff sometimes. I let them, like push their tongue into, even like not at the top, maybe also to the side, like to the left or to the right, to stimulate, like different cranial nerves, like the hypoglossal nerve. And that's just like something that I've been using for years now with a lot of my clients and a lot of my athletes. And I do a lot of experimenting around it. So I see, okay, like when they push their tongue to the right, for example, like, do they get more flexible, or do they maybe have, like maybe more strength on that side? So it's pretty cool because like I use a dynamometer. So it's like basically like a grip strength device. Okay. So I can basically just always test the response of my client's nervous system, because like grip strength is a very neuro related test that we can use. So basically I can just, test someone's grip strength and at the same time, let them push their tongue to the right side, to the left side. up, down, whatever. And that's what I've been actually doing for years. And then when I found the study, it was actually pretty, cool to see that, like when people, put their tongue into specific regions, that you can actually see changes in strength output. And basically what they did in that particular study was they tested 18 young athletes. So it was like 18 young male athletes. And what they did was they tested like an isokinetic like test on the knee. So they were like testing knee extension and knee flexion, and they were looking at different outcomes. They were looking at peak torque, so basically the maximal like rotation that can occur at the knee, or like the rotational force that can occur at the knee. They were looking at speed, they were looking at deceleration, and it was actually really interesting because like they tested on 3 different days. So they looked at, okay, one day we're going to push the tongue, like they had 3 different positions. One day we're going to push it into what's called like the spot, like the right spot, like right behind, like not like right on the teeth, but like right behind the teeth.
Yeah.
And then so like they had three positions, one right behind the teeth, one right on the spot, and then one where they just let the tongue like hang down, like in a lower position. And then basically what they found was that in the group that actually had the tongue pushing against the palate on the roof of the mouth, they actually had 30% more torque and power output in the test, which was actually pretty cool.
30%.
And it's a pretty, I mean, if
Huge.
it's huge. If you look at some, other strength studies, it's usually, I don't know, it's definitely not 30%. It's a lot less than that. So that was just kind of like where I also got interested in, like, okay, that's pretty cool. Let me try that out more with my athletes, So, I was just testing it out on them. I was like, listen, found this cool article. You can read it here. Don't ask me, just push your tongue in your mouth, try it out and see if you get stronger. And the feedback was like basically the same thing like the study. Like a lot of my athletes were like, this is crazy. Like I got so much stronger. I was so much more stable. And it was really impressive. And like to this day, when I work out, I do this now. I'm like at a really like subconscious level where I don't really think about it. My my mind muscle memory or whatever you might want to call it, just like has saved that whole pattern of just pushing the tongue through the roof of the mouth. And that's basically what the study found, and that's why I was really blown away by that whole finding. Again, like 30% more, which is pretty cool.
Being that you have been utilizing this with your athletes and you've been utilizing it yourself, in your opinion, do you feel what change is made by putting your tongue there? Like, do you feel like it has something to do with the airway or the positioning or breathing, or where do you feel that you're seeing, or what I should say, like, why do you think you're seeing that difference?
Yeah, so there's different thoughts that I have about it.
Okay.
I mean, we can't really tell. That's the first thing. We can't really tell. Like these are all just assumptions. But like I would say the most logical explanation why that happens is more of like that we're sending a signal to the brain that the brain can feel more protected. So I have to circle back a little bit on that, because if you look at peak performance or if you look at pain, it's basically always the same thing. And I always preach that in like to every one of my clients and like in every single one of my courses. The brain has one primary goal, which is to keep us alive and keep us safe. So like all the brain cares about is survival. The brain doesn't care about how strong you are. The brain doesn't care about how you feel. The brain doesn't care about if you have knee pain. all the brain cares about is keeping you alive and keeping you safe. That's the most important thing. So now when you look at the mouth and when you look at everything that's happening here, above the neck, everything's very sensitive. So like the tongue is very sensitive. The eyes are very sensitive. I use a ton of like eye exercises with my clients. I do a lot of stuff with the inner ear. So like I use a lot of these different, sensory receptors, a lot of these sensory input systems, because I just know that they are very sensitive and they can actually affect the whole body. So my suspicion with the tongue is, since we actually, when we push the tongue to the roof of our mouth, since that can actually also help stabilize some of our neck muscles. Okay. So, and like, that's the cool thing, like for the listeners, what they can do is they can just hold, or you guys can do it too. Just hold your hand like on the back of your head, and now just move your tongue around. Like push it up and push it down. Okay, you can do the same thing with the eyes. If you move your eyes in a circular motion, you should feel that there's some level of activity going on in the back of the neck.
I do feel that.
I do feel that too.
And that just shows you, okay, like there is a connection. And like I have this program, it's called 3D anatomy or something like that, where you can like, look at the different connections of the body and like the eyes and the tongue. It's really fascinating. And it just, it just shows you that there's this innate connection between the eyes, between the tongue, between the jaw and the neck, and basically the whole body. So my take on that is that probably it's just a feeling of, okay, the brain feels more guarded, the brain feels a little bit more stable, a little bit more safe. So the brain is like, okay, there you go, peak performance. Like that's basically like oftentimes what you will see with a lot of clients, with a lot of athletes that I work with, is that whenever the brain feels the safest, that's usually when you can actually see the best, performance, pain-free movement. Like it's just basically always these connections. And like we can make the brain feel safe in a million different ways, but like I said, just using a lot of these like very sensitive areas in the head and like in the mouth, eyes, even things like smell and all of these things, they can really affect how the brain feels, and thus also like how we perform and how we move.
Interesting. We do a lot with, that there's so many nerves running through the palate too. So in the roof of the mouth. So when your tongue's up there, it can also be giving your brain that signal that, okay, we're not in, fight or flight. We're kind of just at ease right now.
Yeah. I actually, that's also really interesting that you say, because like, if you look at, the palate, like if you look at it, like there is all these branches of the trigeminal nerve as well. So like the trigeminal nerve also plays a really important role sometimes in muscle tone. Like that's something that a lot of people don't really like have on their radar, is that the trigeminal nerve, it originates in the pons, and like the pons actually, like when you look at some of the pathways of the brain, of like how the brain stabilizes certain muscles and like fires up certain muscles, like the pons can actually like increase extensor tone, for example. So that can also be something that eventually is a connection there. But yeah, that's something what you said is that's really like a good point of the different nerves that are like in the palate itself too. That can also be a connection for sure.
And even from like the infancy pediatric phases, when they're sucking on their thumb, it's technically making contact with the hard palate. It's giving them those nerves that sensation, which is calming them just on a different level. So instead of it being their tongue, it's now their thumb, which is often so hard. Why when we're trying to break it, there's so many other things that happen. But honestly, the reason we started talking about the whole sports and tongue positioning, so I'm a Yankee fan. I don't know if I can say that, but Harrison Bader wears an appliance in his mouth, and he noticed a difference in his performance and his output when he has this appliance in his mouth. And what's interesting is that this appliance encourages him to keep his tongue down. And now everything we've done as myofunctional therapists and the studies we've read, everything is about tongue up for all the reasons that you have mentioned. And again, the spot is what all we do as speech pathologists and myofunctional therapists is talk about the spot. So much so we've created an appliance that teaches patients where to put that actually has a place for their spot. And we're seeing big changes with TMJ and the TMJ pain and sleeping. And so we've been playing around with doing a sports version of it. So we've started to have different people try it, and they notice like a difference right away. Even just baseball players that are noticing a difference in how hard they're hitting the ball, how far they're hitting the ball, their bat speed. And it blew our, like, we were just like, oh my God, I can't believe that the tongue has such a purpose. And it wasn't that long ago that anytime you mentioned tongue positioning, people thought you were crazy. You know, if you said, put your tongue up on the roof of your mouth and it's going to give you all these benefits, people are like, that doesn't make any sense. And now I feel like in the last 5 to 7 years, it's starting to become more common thought, and it's more people are starting to notice or research it themselves and start noticing the difference, just like I'm sure you have with your athletes. Do you keep data on your patients, whether they're your clients, from putting their tongue in a certain place versus not putting their tongue in a certain place?
Yeah. So I should definitely get better at that, because like that's something where that's what I was referring to earlier, that I basically just do my own research on my own clients and my own athletes. I do some, like strength testing. I do some range of motion testing. I usually, like when I work with clients online, they send me like their videos of, let's say like a forward bend or a squat or like a straight leg raise or like a hip flexion measurement or shoulder flexion, like just basic mobility assessments or like range of motion assessments. And that's what I actually like really track with my clients. With performance, it's quite interesting. I've worked with, like, I think the best way to actually like measure it is with strength athletes, but also, for example, like track and field athletes. So for example, with like track and field athletes, that's where you can obviously like have the best data, because like they constantly are like, keeping track of like how fast do I run and like, how high do I jump. And that's where, I really see a lot of the benefits that I do with, like neurotraining, where we can just basically go ahead and, test something out. So like, let's say I want to help you jump higher. Okay. Measure how you can jump. Okay. Let's do an eye exercise. Yeah, let's push the tongue to the roof of the mouth. Let's push the tongue to the right. Let's push the tongue to the left. Retest. Okay. Do you jump higher? Okay. Maybe if you put your tongue to the right, that gave you the best results. Okay. That was just one try. So maybe we should try on another day. If the findings are consistent, might be something about it. Okay. So like, that's sort of like how I go about my, some of my testing that I do. It's just really like test, apply, retest. But I do also apply a lot of more like in-depth neurological assessments with my clients. So like, I look at things even like for example, if they push the tongue out, where does the tongue move? Does it move to the left? Does it move to the right? Like that can give me, for example, also more insights about, some of these cranial nerves that control a lot of what's going on in our body. And like I said, the tongue is just so fascinating, in my opinion. Like it's so like almost like, I don't know if that's the right word, like mystique. Is that the right word? I'm German. Sometimes I don't know the right words, but like it's like just if you look at that study, it's just so cool to see some of these like hidden things that the tongue can do. Of like, okay, wow, that's pretty impressive that just by holding the tongue in a certain position, we're getting stronger. But again, if we look at, how the brain processes sensory information, and if you look at actually like the homunculus, I don't know if you guys know what the homunculus is. Probably you do. which is this funny looking creature. And if you look at the tongue of the homunculus, it's massive. So basically, the homunculus just tells us a certain percentage of sensory mapping that we have in a specific area. And, you know, the bigger the area in the homunculus, the bigger the sensory representation in the somatosensory cortex. And if you look at the tongue, it's massive, it's big. So, you know, like just doing different things with the tongue is so, you know, cool. And like even things like, that's been a while since I looked at that, but there was a lot of research. I think it's called the PONS. It's like a device. You probably know it.
When I'm thinking of PONS, I'm thinking of it, of the brain, not your referring.
Yeah, the device is actually called the PONS, and
okay.
I think that was like 10 years ago. I haven't really looked into it like since a few years, but that device actually also was used for patients with like TBI, traumatic brain injury, concussions, and they found that it was just like this electronic like device that you put in your mouth, and it just like stimulates the tongue.
Okay.
And that device actually showed that, you know, all of a sudden people, when they had like all these crazy TBI related symptoms of like, you know, not able to block out noises, lack of spatial awareness, lack of, I don't know, just like this like a lot of these inhibitory processes, like they just found that all of a sudden they put this thing in their mouth and, you know, it's gone. Like that's just really, really fascinating, in my opinion. So yeah, a lot of different things you can do with tongue position. I mean, obviously breathing is also a key factor. There was also this research about tongue position and facial formation. Probably also familiar with that research.
Yeah.
I actually made a post about that last year and got a ton of hateful comments of people like,
really?
why are you talking to me? Like, I was like, I didn't talk to you.
Yeah, this wasn't aimed
Don't
at
take
you.
it so personal.
Don't read the post if you don't want it to be offensive to you.
Yeah, it was crazy. But like, yeah, it's definitely a fact. I mean, of course there's going to be people that, you know, mouth breathe and don't have deformities. Like that's when, you know, like the power of individuality comes into play. But it makes a lot of sense that depending on where you place your tongue, your face can, you know, like put on a certain shape, specifically in younger years. And, you know, like that's just the biomechanical effects. When you look at the neurological effects, what mouth breathing does to the sympathetic nervous system, like mouth breathing in general is more sympathetic, it's more stressful to the brain. So, you know, it's just like all of these different things. And I don't know if you've ever looked into like studies on, I don't know, like autism or depression and mouth breathing. There might also be some connections. I haven't looked into it that much, to be honest with you, but I'm sure like there might be some connections there too. So yeah, all of these different connections.
Yeah. We do a lot with, you know, improper tongue resting posture as myofunctional therapists, and we're seeing those changes where they're in malocclusion, you know, where their jaws, they're in an underbite or an overbite, the lower jaw isn't developing correctly because the tongue position isn't in the force of the tongue isn't going in the right direction. Same thing with airway. The tongue's supposed to rest up in the palate and naturally expand the palate. And when your tongue's not up there, now you have this more high, narrow palate, which is taking away airway space in the nasal cavity. So, you know, we see all these structural changes because that tongue's not resting correctly. And when we get them young enough and we get that tongue up there, we can help to support the natural growth and development of the jaw and of the palate and of the teeth that we're supposed to be seeing. So the tongue, you know, we are definitely in agreement that the tongue does so much. And just having that tongue in the right place helps with that overall wellness of the whole body.
Yeah.
Do you find that your clients, if they're reliant on mouth breathing, or have score weaker or less on some of these assessments, or they're not comparable to someone that maybe is able to utilize nasal breathing and a closed mouth posture?
I mean, the one thing that I always try to be really aware of is like, how I talk to my clients about these things. Because I don't want to freak them out too much, honestly. Like it takes a lot, like compassion for someone that, for example, tells me like, yeah, like I get these comments all the time when when I post something about nose breathing. Like usually there is at least 1 or 2 comments of people like, I can't even, like I was posting the other day about like nose breathing while running and how that's such a cool tool to like, improve your endurance. But then, there was one comment that said, yeah, I can't even breathe through my nose at rest, and that's, it's a problem. It's definitely a problem. I do believe that you can definitely train it. Of course, there's like, structural problems that sometimes can occur. So I tend to, just tell people to train it, to be more aware of it. I try to just like, progressively overload them into, just getting better at nose breathing. Obviously in the beginning, they won't be able to like run with just nose breathing. So maybe it's just like, maybe it's even things like pursed lip breathing that we have to use first when they can't breathe through the nose. Like if they're really so stuffed up here, which can obviously like have a lot of different reasons. We can, for example, also start with just pursing the lips and like blowing out less air, which can also have a positive effect on the brain, because you're just basically like improving your CO2 tolerance. You're basically holding back the CO2, like you're basically having like you're breathing out less carbon dioxide, so you can actually improve your CO2 tolerance. And as we all know, like CO2 tolerance is like really important for brain health, for performance, for endurance, and things like that. So I would say, of course, there is a connection, but like I try to be, like really cautious with what I tell my clients about that topic.
Yes. And it's ultimately impossible to breathe in your mouth if your tongue is in the proper position.
Right.
Right.
You can't mouth breathe if your tongue is up. So, that helps them have to rely on that nasal breathing and retrain. And just like you were talking about with your own tongue posture, and you said, I don't even have to think about it anymore. My tongue just is up there. That's neuromuscular re-education that we look for long-term success. And the same can happen with the nasal breathing, getting them used to what that feels like and breathing nasally and making that become your habitual breathing pattern.
I think it's such it's something that we need to be more proactive at looking at, because I think so many times the compensatory strategies we adapt as individuals help us to get through the day to day, but they're not giving us optimal health, especially for, it's funny, one of my friends who says I can never breathe through her nose. She's like, I just put my tongue in the right position and I actually can breathe through my nose. So this whole time she's like, I'm not doing surgery. I'm like, oh, maybe you don't need surgery, And then she's like, wow, I actually can.
Crazy.
But
that's crazy.
I've relied on other avenues or other, other ways to do so. So I just assumed there was something wrong. And I think that's just the world that we live in, is like cause and effect, instead of let's see what our body can do. If this is the cause, then how can we affect the change versus do we need a nasal spray? Do we need an endoscopy? Do we need a deviated septum surgery? What else is wrong that can be fixed in that moment? And so much of it is our own anatomy just making those changes.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's like a lot of structures in our body. Like, of course, that if you have, let's say like a really thick acetabulum and like a very small hip socket, like these are the things that probably can't really change. But like there's a lot of structures in our body that can actually adapt. And like, for example, what I really focus on with my clients as well is, for example, also like their rib cage shape, which can also affect someone's breathing strategy. So like if you look at, like the infrasternal angle, for example, which is, basically just you can call them floating ribs. It's actually like, it's basically the lower ribs. So it's basically like if somebody has, for example, a more like narrower shape of a rib cage, or like more of like a wider shape. And the interesting thing about these bones is they're like the most pliable bones in the human body. So we can actually, just by changing our way that we breathe, we can change that infrasternal angle. Maybe if, like, for example, me, I have more like a wider angle, we can technically just, for a few, it's not like not going to be like a crazy change. I'm not going to have this super narrow rib cage like a marathon runner from like, you know, 1 year to the next, but I can actually, like, you know, help my brain access more, you know, CO2, more oxygen just by like changing the structure of the rib cage as well. And like I use, you know, like I use breathing techniques. I actually use a lot of strengthening exercises for that too. Like, for example, if you hold your hands over your head and then breathe out, for example, like that can also help shape the rib cage. And like there's a lot of different things that you can do when somebody has issues with their breathing or with like all of these different things. So yeah,
it's so interesting because you're talking about things that we do as therapists, but for different reasons. So we would do the exact same thing for patients that don't have, maybe have voice disorders and are not, that need to use their diaphragm more and maximize their breath support. So we're working with them to build the strength in the muscles on a completely different, for a completely different reason, but at the same time, it's completely aligns with what we're using it for, but our purposes are just different in the end, which is amazing how it just all comes together.
Yeah, which is so funny because like one thing I always say is everyone's an athlete, and it really doesn't matter like who you're working with. It's all about, you know, like just knowing the connections and like knowing how the body works. And at the end of the day, that's why I'm, you know, so fascinated about the brain. At the end of the day, it basically all starts with the nervous system. Like we're trying to, you know, just like reshape the, like how the brain, you know, activates certain muscles. All of these like subconscious things that we do, whether it's breathing, whether it's walking, whether it's looking with the eyes, balancing, like all of these like really subconscious things are things that I focus on. Like I really focus on obviously training them consciously so that they can then in the future turn into something subconscious, which I think is always something important.
Absolutely. I have one more question, I promise. Do you notice any changes with your patients that say have MS or Parkinson's, and as it relates to their tongue placement?
Yeah, so that's actually a pretty interesting thing, because if you look at some of these more you know, complex cases like Parkinson's, for example, one thing that you will see also like in young children, like in young adults, is that they use the tongue to, you know, create certain tasks as well, you know, so they can, I don't know, like when they try to like focus on something like complicated motor task, they try to use different tongue movements to sort of like compensate that. Which, you know, again, that's a whole different story of like why that is. Maybe you guys can tell me what your take on that is. I'm curious. But that's just something that I see a lot there. And what I'm really focusing on with these clients as well is teaching them about tongue position. It's a little bit harder usually because, you know, like their brain is, sometimes it takes longer for a lot of these like, you know, subconscious motor patterns to like evolve. But it's definitely something that I tell people of like, okay, just try to do it a little bit more, you know, a little bit more consciously, to like breathe through the nose, push the tongue up, and things like that. And it's actually funny, not last month, I think like 2 months ago, I had a client with Parkinson's, and I was actually testing the range of motion before the session, and then we did it was like some vibration tool that I use for the tongue. It's called the C vibe. Probably know it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we use them all the time.
Awesome. So I
You're in
use,
our wheelhouse now. Yeah.
yes. And I used that with him, and I just let him vibrate the right side of his tongue, which was something that we wanted to focus on with him. And all of a sudden he got so much better. And like, even because he was struggling with his speech, his speech got better after that. So like, that's something where, you know, you can just play around with all of these different things that we can, you know, utilize. And if you understand your neurology behind it, and if you understand what the goal is behind doing certain tasks, like, you can actually create pretty cool things. Yeah,
I mean, I definitely think if you have time, look at the appliance we created. I think it aligns it aligns so much with what your purpose and what your goals are, especially when it comes to the tongue. And like I said, we're seeing some great improvements, but it may be something that would be good for some of your clients. It's called the Spot Pal. And again, it's really teaching them, giving them a place to teach them where their tongue needs to sit, and building that muscle memory pattern. And what happens is after you wear it for a period of time, you take it out, your tongue retains that posture.
So is that just something that they put like in their mouth?
So yes, it's custom to each person's mouth, custom to each person's palate and their spot. Making sure that, and we make sure that the spot is specific based on, we do either a scan or an impression of the mouth. And then we make this appliance, and it can have it so that there's actually reminders that keep their tongue away from their teeth. So they not only have, okay, this is where my tongue needs to sit, but if it doesn't sit in the right place, it's going to be reminded to move back. And we're seeing some of those same things. And like I said, we are in the early stages of doing one for sports, for Sport Pal. It's going to be called the Sport Pal. But we've started utilizing it with speech and swallowing and sleeping and TMJ. And the results have been amazing. And it's just, it's mind blowing, because again, it's like the simplest idea, but yet it has such significant results. And it sounds exactly like what you're doing on a regular basis. But especially for your patients that have Parkinson's or MS that may need more reminders, it might be something that's beneficial for them.
Absolutely. No, that definitely sounds very interesting. I mean, all of these, I really like devices or things that people can do passively almost. And, you know, just teach the nervous system to do something new. Like I also, you know, mouth tape every night.
Do you? I was
like
actually
5 years
I've been
doing it, and it's just like, you know, you're basically just training your brain for 8 hours straight to be a nose breather, and like, I think that really makes a massive difference.
And we get so much grief about that, because we use the same thing, and you know, people are like, you're restricting their breathe, and we're not restricting anything. It's building muscle memory. We're not, you know, wiring their mouth shut. We are trying to build a muscle memory and change a pattern. But it's interesting that you're using, and like I said, just for totally different reasons, but I
think it's interesting that people still think mouth taping at night is weird. I think
oh my God,
that was weird like 5 years ago, but like now it's like, okay, have you not looked into like,
oh my, the anxiety
like, is that really like something that we need to talk about?
Well, thank you so much for taking the time tonight. Absolutely. It was such a nice to meet you, and we will definitely be in touch, because I think this is insanely educational for our families, for us, and I think this is like where the future is going. I think people are starting to realize the benefits of tongue positioning, and I'm glad to see it's such a holistic approach. It's affecting so many areas.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Talk the Talk.
We hope it was enjoyable and educational, and further supports you both personally and professionally.
For more information, please check out our Myo and Myo Minute podcast, as well as our other episodes of Talk the Talk. And don't forget to check out our tongue training appliance, Spot Pal, to help with tongue thrusting, thumb sucking, snoring, TMJ, mouth breathing, and so much more. Visit thespotpal.com.
Exactly. What else is happening here?
Yeah.
No, but it's so funny. Like we have to introduce it where the parent is able to watch, the child feels safe. Like there's just so many
Yeah,
pieces to it.
with children, obviously, it's a whole
Mhm.
different story. That's a
Mhm.
whole
Yeah.
different story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh my God. Yeah, I can.
Oh yes, it's
The
enjoyable.
helicopter parents.
Exactly. Well,
Oh my
this was
God.
so amazing and so interesting. I definitely think we could have a supplemental one of these meetings or another one of these interviews because it was an education to us as well.
Absolutely. I
And
actually have my own podcast too, so I would actually love to have you on in the future too. Talk a little bit more about, what you guys do, and
Yeah.
maybe some easy techniques that people can do for
would-
speech or anything. I'm sure it's not only
Definitely.
speech that what you guys are doing. So
Yeah, give you some tongue exercises, strengthen that
yeah,
tongue, get it up there.
maybe some
sure,
things that will carry over to your clients as well. I know
definitely.
what you've taught us today, we'll definitely start putting out there.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
this will be played for all of our patients in our waiting room. So you'll
Cool.
get to meet, you'll get to reach a large audience. We usually see around 2,500 patients a week. So you will have a large audience. Yes.
I didn't know that. I
uh-huh.
should have shaved my beard a little bit. That.
We'll do it again. Just wear your tux next time. Okay.
Awesome. All right.